Hello and welcome everyone to the third of our talks of somatics at large, a subject that to me is really interesting as we explore Moshe Feldenkrais' legacy and how that has led to other things, how other professions have been influenced by his work, and of course how he was influenced by other professions as well. So, sometimes it's really interesting that things don't go as planned, but then they end up turning out better because we originally had someone else that was scheduled for somatics at large that had to cancel at the last minute. And we were fortunate enough to find out that Cynthia Allen's partner, Larry Wells, has done a lot of work in the somatic field. He is, of course, he has a master's degree in divinity. I can't believe I couldn't say divinity and social work. But he's also a master practitioner of NLP, and he teaches sounder sleep, working as a substance abuse counselor, as well as helping people through learning these two different processes. So before I bring Larry on, I just want to remind everybody about the chat function. And, take a moment to introduce yourself, find where the chat is so that you can participate in dialogue with each other as we continue the interview with Larry. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Larry Wells to the program. Hello, Larry. It's so nice to see you in Cincinnati.
Hi, nice to see you and wishing you well. It's good to meet you finally.
So it's kind of interesting. You're not a Feldenkrais practitioner, but you specialize in working with body-mind ideas with your clients, and
That's right.
you have integrated these two different processes in your work. So maybe we could start with sounder sleep, because that's that to me is directly related. I knew Michael Krugman and worked with him back when he was early developing sounder sleep. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how it's connected to Feldenkrais and then what the program is.
Well, certainly, obviously, Michael got interested in sleep and the sleep.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. It's my fault. So we'll just keep on going, and I'll tell Cynthia, because the recording thing didn't show up where it normally does, but it's there. I'm sorry. I'm going to ask that question again, and that way you can recover.
I can what?
No, I was going to say I'll ask that question again, and I'll ask Cynthia to cut it. My bad. So Larry, if you could talk a little bit about sounder sleep and how Michael Krugman developed it, its relationship to Feldenkrais, and maybe a little bit more about what it is.
I'd be glad to talk a little bit about what it is. I had met Michael when he came to Cincinnati and did a training, and exactly how he got into it, I'm not sure I'm able to recall all of that, but I can tell you that his interest was the fact that so many people have difficulty sleeping, or some of them have trouble going to sleep, some of them have trouble staying asleep, some of them have trouble waking up in the middle of the night and worrying about and trying to get back to sleep and can't get back to sleep. And some of those are problematic in and of themselves, but sometimes it's just the worry that I can't get back to sleep that keeps them awake. One of the things that I learned from Michael was that historically there seems to be reason to believe that human beings were created initially to go to sleep when it got dark, sleep for 3 or 4 hours, wake up for an hour or two, and then go back to sleep. In medical journals, they talk about what happens during the second sleep. So part of that waking up in the middle of the night may be just biological. And you'd be surprised how many people get comforted once I've said that. They don't have to worry about getting back to sleep. They said, oh, this is natural. I'll just maybe they'll do something during the, prayer time or reading or something like that. Michael said sometimes back in those days that was when they made babies. And so at any rate, and then eventually just fall back to sleep naturally. So Michael's teaching is that one of the major reasons that people have difficulty sleeping is that we live in a stress-filled society. and that most people, or maybe most people, at least in our culture, have high levels of ACTH and cortisol coursing through their bloodstreams almost 24 hours a day. Those are stress hormones. Those are the fight or flight hormones. So even though you may not always feel anxious, that high level of anxiety at the neurological level is always present. So he wanted to figure out, how do we begin to bring down those neurological levels, those levels of ACTH and cortisol, and bring down the activity of the neurological system. So he developed a series of processes, and they take one of three forms. The first one is called guided natural breathings. And when I was taking my training, I learned 3 or 4 of those. And the deal is that the whole idea is to help people to recognize how they naturally breathe. Many times people think that when I'm going to talk about breathing, that I want them to breathe in a spatial way. And that couldn't be further from the truth. What I want them to learn is how they breathe naturally. So, of course, the first thing that happens is I say, okay, I'm going to ask you to do the impossible. I want you to notice you're breathing without changing it, and almost everybody does, And so Michael developed these 3 or 4, well, he developed a whole series of them. I learned in my training about 4 of the ways of just learning how you breathe naturally. And just learning that, and the fact that it makes a big difference for people. People think that when you're sleeping, you're lying perfectly still, but the truth is your whole body, at least your whole torso, is moving as you breathe, because the stomach comes up, the chest comes up, the ribs move, and if you were to really pay attention, your shoulders move, your hips move, every part of that torso is involved in the breathing process. So to try to stiffen up and lay in bed just creates more anxiety, and as a result, sleep becomes even more and more difficult. In addition to that, he developed a series of processes he called day tamers, and I'm going to lead you through one of those in a little bit. But a day tamer is an exercise that you do during the day, sitting up, can generally be done at your desk, at your workplace. Nobody notices that you're really doing anything. I find myself doing one of them in the middle of meetings sometimes. And first of all, it just brings a sense of comfort to me. But it also helps to keep any kind of anxiety that might be there, just to kind of keep it in check. I have one friend who all he has to do is sit down and go into this process, and he's fallen asleep already. So it's very powerful, but the day tamers aren't designed really to put you to sleep. And then there are used to be called the mini moves, but now they're called night tamers, things that you can actually do in the bed while you're trying to get to sleep. One of the things that Michael discovered is that if you have trouble sleeping, it's not your body that's up running around, it's your mind. So how do you use your body to calm the mind? And those are the kinds of things that he began to work with. And he developed this whole process and in combination. So when I do my workshops, we'll do one of each in each of the sessions. So they're about an hour and a half. So when I have a 3-session workshop, you'll get 3 guided natural breathing processes, you'll get 3 day tamer processes, and you'll get 3 night tamer processes. Now, if you're ready, I'd like to demonstrate one of the day tamers. That's perfect for sitting at the table or at a desk.
Sure. I mean, I have some questions, but maybe you'll calm me down. Which would you prefer?
That's fine. I'll take the questions.
Well, so I was thinking about what you were saying. How do we use the body to calm the mind? Because, Moshe Feldenkrais said that it's not that there's a mind-body connection, but that the mind and the body are the same thing.
Right.
So are you really using the body or are you actually using an aspect of, you know, your attention, which who knows where attention comes from, in order to find a different relationship with the nervous system? It's just an interesting, so maybe what we're saying, I'm answering my own question, you're using some body-based approaches to calm the mind.
Clearly it is,
but it's not like it's two separate things, really.
That's correct. It clearly, some people have rightly said, oh, this is a kind of distraction. That is, it allows you to focus your thinking on something other than what's, you know, what the Buddhists call the monkey mind, or the or the worry things that's going on through your head and so forth. It's focusing on something else.
Right.
And so this day tamer is Michael called it his main squeeze, and he said also, he says, in order to do the main squeeze, you have to learn the secret handshake. So he likes a lot of little gimmicks. So in order to learn this, do the secret handshake, you have to put your hand up like you're going to say stop, and with your other hand grab the thumb, and then stick that finger across the palm. Now, the one that's holding the thumb, put that, yeah, there you go, like that. And then put that in your lap. Just relax your hands in your lap. And the first thing that you need to do is just notice your breathing. Don't try to change it. Just breathe simply, breathe normally. And what I'd like to invite you to do is every time you inhale, ever so slightly squeeze the thumb. And when you exhale, let it go. So on the inhale, you squeeze. On the exhale, you let it go. On the inhale, the exhale. And what do you notice? Just pay attention to what's happening to your body. Where's your focus?
Well, of course, my focus is on the activity, right? You've basically short-circuited my thinking brain, because I'm so busy breathing and squeezing and coordinating that, you know, the mind becomes empty. I don't know if I kept on going whether that would change, but right now, this very minute, it feels that. And the other thing that of course I'm feeling is the sort of that wonderful connection that we discover in our work between when we flexing of the hand, you know, connecting to different muscles in the body that have a tendency to tense when I tense my fist. And it's soothing to squeeze my thumb. Yes. And that's probably the effect that he's really looking for. But that's, you know, all these different things are taking place at the same time.
Right. Now we're going to add something to that. This time you're going to keep squeezing your thumb on the inhale, exhale, let it go. Then squeeze the finger on the inhale and let it go on the exhale. So you alternate between squeezing and letting go the thumb, then squeezing and letting go the finger.
That actually feels better because my finger was jealous.
Right.
So now it feels like I'm giving both of them the attention that they need.
Right. And one of the things that you might practice or try to discover is, does it feel better to squeeze on the inhale and let loose on the exhale, or does it feel better to squeeze on the exhale and let it go on the inhale? Some people have a preference.
That's very interesting. I can't say that I have a preference. They definitely feel different.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and Michael had a theory about that in terms of inhaling and squeezing are both active processes. Exhaling and letting go are, release processes, relaxation processes. Some people feel that two active things at one time, then going to two inactive things was just too big a leap. So that's why for some people, it was the other way around. But most people have found that squeezing on the inhale and letting go on the exhale works best. Now, I have a funny story about a client who was seeing us for pain management, but one of the things that I did with her was to teach her this process. And sometimes she would use it. She would use it during the day, but one night she decided that she was going to use it in bed, and she was squeezing and letting go. And then she got confused whether she's supposed to be squeezing her thumb or squeezing her finger. And she said, "Oh, the heck with it, I'm just going to go to sleep." So she did. So she said, I had done it for a while, and then I got confused, and I just said, let it go and go to sleep. And she did. So this is something that Michael says, you practice this 3 or 4 times a day for 3 minutes or so. And what happens when you do this, those levels of the stress hormones begin to come down. And when you stop, they go back up, but they may not go up as high. And the more frequently you do it, they eventually get so that it's lower and lower, and the normal becomes lower than it used to be. So then he says, so you learn how you breathe, then you do a day tamer during the days, and you do one of the night tamers, the mini moves that we do in the sounder sleep. So, and like I just mentioned, I often use some of these processes in things that don't necessarily have to do with sleep. Obviously, this is a very easy and comforting way to lower stress levels. And so people who are stressed out during the day can experience some 3 or 4 minutes of comfort. You have a question?
How you could tell.
Well, no, I noticed faces.
I have a question and an observation.
Okay.
So the observation is simply in terms of its relationship to Feldenkrais work. What I got was, how we always say in a Feldenkrais lesson that nothing is wrong. You can't do a movement wrong.
Correct.
That it's not the movement that's important, but the attention that you're paying to the movement. So because I was thinking to myself, well, what if I ended up squeezing the forefinger and the thumb both at the same time? That would not be wrong either. Either all of them are ways of directing my attention as long as I am attending to it and doing what I think I'm doing. So it's interesting that your client just went, oh, what the heck, and then got the achieved result because she wasn't concerned about whether it was right or wrong or whatever.
Correct.
So I like that. But my question to you is, as a person who also works with mindfulness practices, does this in any way, this particular thing and maybe some of the others, they seem to resonate with concepts of mudras and how, in certain meditation practices, for example, they touch their fingers and as they're counting their breath, or they make different movements in order to keep it connected. Even in Judaism, there's certain movements that are connected to, wanting to reach the higher, but in our case, it's wanting to quiet the mind. Do you feel any kind of connection with that? And you do the same?
Absolutely. And, I see this as indeed a very sort of meditative practice. And in sound or sleep, we don't teach it as a meditative practice, but it can be. And whatever that meditation or contemplation might be, there are those people, and I'm one of them, who've tried for a number of years at various times to sit, as the Buddhists call it, and they told me to focus on my breathing, and often would tell me to take a deep breath, and I couldn't do it. I needed Now, we did walking meditations, and I could do that. So I was the kind of person who needed to focus my attention on something specific. It could have been a mantra, maybe, but so this works for me and for many people. I don't use it so much as a meditative practice, but I do use it as a way of keeping myself, checking my anxiety if there is any, and trying to get through life and with as much fun as possible.
Right.
My favorite expression to people as I'm leaving is just, I say, have as much fun as you can. And I think that's the way we should be.
Absolutely. Right. So it's a wonderful way of directing our attention. And so, and we'll go more into detail later, but in terms of your work with sound or sleep, but basically people could find ways of learning sound or sleep anywhere they are, whether it's online or with a live teacher, right? Is there still a sound or sleep website?
I haven't checked recently, but I don't think it's back up. I think it came down when Michael passed a few years ago. I'm not really sure. I don't remember. Was that 3 or 4 years ago? And so they weren't prepared for that eventuality. And so it was there for a while, and then we got word that it wasn't going to be there, and I don't know whether it's back up.
Right. Now, so it's really the individual teachers who are keeping the legacy of this work alive.
Yeah, at this point, I have not been contacted by any official body recently to re-register or to, any kind of organizational thing.
So what do you do, Larry, when you have a workshop and you're teaching a sound or sleep workshop? And of course, the sign of great success for a sound or sleep workshop is that everyone has fallen asleep. How do you get them up and get them out the door?
That's a good question. Usually during the hour and a half that we're together, the first 2 aren't so bad, so I give them plenty of time. And of course, when I say, okay, for right now, whenever, when it's appropriate for you, I'd like for you to get up from the floor and walk around a little bit, and then we're going to have a discussion and so forth. But by the time I'm doing the third one, they don't want to get up. But they also had this internal conflict with, I got to get someplace, or I need to go home. So, but yeah, I do have people to fall asleep during the course of the event, and that's fine. They will learn that works for them, and that's what they need. And at that point, it's this is part of my belief and part of my NLP training. At that point, their depth of sleep isn't so much that their unconscious mind isn't hearing me. So they may be asleep, and when I say, okay, when it's appropriate for you, I want you to roll over on your side and sit up. And when you're ready, stand up and walk around. And almost always they will respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If they fall
I don't
asleep,
go over and wake them up.
do you provide recordings in case they have fallen asleep and missed the whole lesson?
We do from time to time. And usually when they sign up for the course, we already have online a whole series.
So there's tools for
them.
them.
They could sign up for that. Yeah.
Because I remember people being anxious when I took the workshop years ago. They were anxious. They were too anxious to relax completely because they were afraid they would miss something.
Right.
And the whole point was to fall asleep. So I'm glad that now you're providing tools. Great. So you kind of were dovetailing us a little bit when you started to talk about what you're saying, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. I know that there are people who have heard of it. There are people who haven't heard of it. Could you give us a brief history, maybe?
Yeah, sure. This one, I know a bit about the history of it, and I live in an area where almost no one has heard of it. People who look up neuro-linguistics programming on the internet and they Google it and they look for it in this area in Cincinnati, they call me and say, "You're the guy. You're the only one that's listed in this area." I said, "Well, I know some people that have been trained, but I don't think they're doing it as NLP. Some of them were lawyers and they used them in other fields." So neurolinguistics programming came out of the work of Richard Bandler, who was a physicist and a mathematician at the University of California in Santa Cruz, and John Grinder, who was a linguist. Bandler was working in the library, and his job was to catalog a bunch of films of Fritz Perls. Fritz Perls was a counselor who developed Gestalt therapy. And Richard would watch these, and after watching a few of them, he began having Gestalt groups on campus. and he and John decided that they were curious why some people had real success in counseling and others with the same training didn't. Mm-hmm. And they theorized that they didn't need, or they hypothesized, I should say, that they didn't need the training. All they needed to do was to watch what they did. And see what was different about one versus the other. So they studied Fritz Perls, they studied Virginia Satir. Virginia was the one who did family therapy. If you had a troubled child, then they said, "We want you to counsel the child." And she said, "No, I want the whole family." And she saw that as a unit, and she had much success when a lot of other people didn't. And they began to say, "How come? Why is she so good?" And then the third person they modeled was Milton Erickson in Phoenix. He was a psychiatrist and is what's currently called the father of clinical hypnosis. And he would call you in, set you in a chair, and bore you to death, and you'd go out and change your life. And nobody could, so they began to model them. And it came out, they began learning some things, and they would teach it in their class, and the kids in the class would just go out and have a ball. One of the first things they began to notice was that Virginia would say to one person in the family, says, "Does that sound right to you? Can you hear what they're saying?" And then she would ask another person, "So how do you see that?" And they began to wonder, why does she ask one person, and she always asks the same person the question about how does it sound? The same person, how do you see that? And they began to discover that we have preferences, that they listen to their language. And one person was always using auditory words. "It sounds to me like I overheard this. I say to myself." Another person will talk about what they saw and how it sees. "Man, I just can't see how that's going to happen." If you ask somebody to tell you about a vacation, the visual person will tell you about the beach and what they saw, and the mountains are up there and they're so beautiful, and the sea over here, etc. And you ask the person who had feelings, they would say, "Oh man, the air coming off the ocean and the sand beneath my feet and the waves coming in just felt so good, and the warmth of the sun." And you ask the auditory person about their vacation, and they give you an itinerary. "We went here, we went here, we went." You don't know what they saw, you don't know what they felt, but they were very da, 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 da. And Virginia picked up on that language intuitively. She didn't really realize, this is one of my understanding of this, she didn't actually realize why she was doing what she was doing. But they put it together. And then they also noticed that people access certain kinds of information by moving their eyes in a certain way. And so if I were to ask you to remember the house you lived in when you were 6, and if you remembered the house, yeah, there you go. Eyes go up. Eyes go up and to your right, and you picture, and I would ask, how many doors, including closet doors? Well, there's only one way to answer that. So you make an internal picture and you walk through the house, you count the doors. Well, they noticed that people always who were visual, and they frequently were looking up. So the eyes go up to make pictures. One side is recalled pictures, and the other side is created pictures. And the side where you create the pictures, that's the place where interior decorators live up there. They walk into a room and they see drapery, they see furniture and carpet, and they visualize all of that. And they do that by moving their eyes. Auditory people, pretty much horizontal. Kinesthetic people are down. And so they begin to notice that. Now, not everybody is the same. So you kind of have to test it out. And people say, well, you can always tell when somebody's lying. Well, that's not really the truth. Somebody who may have moved their eyes into auditory construct may just be choosing their words carefully, rather than making something up that didn't happen, but choosing their words carefully. So that's how it began. And as they got more and more into it, then they began to study how did people recover from things like phobias? How did people recover from deep depression? How do people who finally do that on their own? And so Richard would put an ad in the paper. He wanted to talk to lots and lots of people who, for example, had phobias of height. They couldn't look down over a cliff or something like that. And they had it at one time, but didn't have it anymore. And he would say, how did you do that? What's different now than what you were doing? And the person might say, well, when I got close to the edge, I imagined myself falling over and I could see the pavement or the thing over the cliff, by falling down into it and the ground smashing up into my face. And I don't have that movie anymore. I can go over there and look, but the movie doesn't run. So John and Richard got together and figured out how they could change the movie. And they've developed a process that at first took about 15 minutes. Grinder decided to challenge Richard one day, Richard Bandler. They were speaking to a group of psychiatrists, and they had come because they had heard these people knew how to cure phobias in 15 or 20 minutes. And Grinder gave this big build up to Richard, and he says, and Richard can do it in 7 minutes. So Richard had to go into some kind of a creative mode and decide what are the crucial parts of this thing. Now, this is the story I've read, so I haven't talked to either of these guys to verify all of this. But they began to say, oh, how can you change? Because how can you change your response to the outside world? But we've always known that two people can go through the same incident and come out feeling very differently about what happened. And the question is, how does that work? And so they began to develop these processes of being able to take people through and change that internal representation. The beginning definition of NLP was, it's the study of the structure of subjective experience. Okay, so you need to unpack that a little bit. It's about, you have this internal experience, something's happening, how do you internalize it? So, for example, what kind of pictures are you making inside? What sounds are there? Are there voices? Are there other kinds of sounds? Where does the feeling, come to you? Is it in the chest, at the stomach, someplace? And what happens if you change the picture? What happens if you change the sound? what would happen if you were to move the feeling from the stomach to the chest, or to move the feeling from the stomach to the shoulder. And they found out that people could do that, that the brain is capable of doing that. In fact, the brain loves those kinds of things, but you have to do it quickly. The brain learns very, very quickly. Most phobias are learned in a single incident and in almost an instant. It goes something like this, the one about heights. Little kids walking along in the park, and there's a ravine, and he walks over to look over to the ravine, and some adult grabs him by the arm and says, "Watch out, you're going to fall," and jerks him back. So he has this picture of the ravine. He has this kinesthetic feeling of the jerking of the arm, and this loud voice telling him it's scary. And his brain learns to respond the same way the little kid did every time he looks over the edge of something. And so if you can learn to do it, you ought to be able to learn. This is a Moshe Feldenkrais thing too. If you're able to do it, you ought to be able to undo it. Moshe said, if I remember correctly, something about any kind of movement that you make ought to be able to be unmade or reversed.
To be reversible, right?
Right.
To be reversible. And as you're speaking, also, I'm thinking about the map.
Exactly.
That what you're really doing is remapping the experience in another part of yourself. I want you to talk a little bit more about this idea that the brain is very quick. You have to be very quick because I think that's an important key thing.
Yeah. So when somebody comes in and they've got this particular picture, that's one of the things that's important about NLP is that if you come in and say, "I've been traumatized, I don't need to know what happened. I want to know, where is the picture stored? What's the sound?" And then I want to take you through a process that'll change it just like that. Mm-hmm. And it has to be quickly. When the psychiatrist learned about the phobia cure, it's got about 4 steps, and they'll do the first 2 steps in one session and the second 2 steps in the next session, and couldn't quite figure out how come it never worked for them. Well, that's because, it has to happen quickly. So, because it has to do with the intensity that makes the change in the neural pathways. That's the language we use about it, is that the brain learns that when this stimuli comes up, I have a new neural pathway to go to. That makes sense? But my brain has always responded in a certain way when when my mother yells at me in this particular voice, I have an internal response. And what we would do is help them change that very quickly to a different kind of response. So, for example, I had a woman who had a critic, an internal critic. You ever had one of those that tells you how dumb you are? No, well, you've known somebody. And it was driving her crazy. She was miserable all the time because this voice just wouldn't shut up. And so we took her through a process, and in the conversation, she comes up with some kind of idea, and it comes to me and says, "Okay, what we're going to do is take it through a process, and we're going to change that internal voice to Donald Duck." And so now she's got this quack, 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 quack going on, and she doesn't have to pay attention. Nobody pays attention to Donald Duck. So another woman who was she had to go to a hospital on a regular basis to just go through a certain procedure. And she said, "I go into a hospital feeling fine, and then there's this one nurse that comes along and says, 'Oh, you poor thing, I feel so bad for you. I'm so sorry you're still here,' etc." And in my conversation with her, she made some comment, and I said, "Okay, we're going to slam a red rubber nose on her so she looks like a clown." And from that point on, she just laughed when she heard that voice. She didn't respond and start to feel bad. Mm. But it has to be done quickly. You can't say, well, take your time and sort of move it over here. A lot of times I will have them make an image of the problem and put it on a rubber band and stretch it clear across the room and slam it behind them. Thing. Let's pretend for a moment that you know how to worry. So, okay. Can we pretend that?
I could pretend that.
Yeah, okay. So if you were to worry, would it be a sound of internal voice, a dialogue, or a picture?
I suppose a voice.
Okay. So there's this voice that's going on. What happens if you turn the volume down? Imagine reaching over and turning the volume down. Mm-hmm. Move it across the hall. Mm-hmm. What happens if you turn it off? Where is it? Well, it's gone. And just in case, you might want to unplug it. And you can teach people that one you can learn to do fairly quickly, and I don't have to slam anything there. But I can tell you that if you start pretty quickly turning the volume down right away, the quicker you turn it down, and you do that about 5 times in a row, it just goes down all by itself. Mm-hmm. You don't even have to think about it anymore. Mm-hmm. When I slam the picture behind them, anytime it pops up, it just goes back there. They don't even have time to respond to it the same way.
So is this a kind of self-hypnosis? Would you say that it falls into that category?
Well, certainly some of the more complicated things is light trance work. There's no question about that. We have a process called the visual squash when there's an internal conflict. There's a part of me that wants to change and a part of me that doesn't want to change. And so I have them put one part in one hand and one part in the other, and we go through a process of where they try to figure out what's the positive intention of this one and this one, and how do we get the positive, the real message from each of these so that they can get them at the same time. Now, the deal about that is that you can't do that in your normal awake state. I don't do any induction. I just have them use their imagination. I mean, by the way, worry is an imagination, right? It's imagining bad stuff. Mm-hmm. So let's use your imagination for good stuff. Mm-hmm. You can, it's once you've done what you can do, there's no need to be wasting the energy on worry. You can turn it off, turn it down.
So, it's so interesting because here is where it does relate to an awareness through movement process, because as you know, we use imagination a lot.
That's exactly right. Yeah, if you can't do it, use your imagination.
Not even if you can't do it.
Even if you can do it.
If you've done it on one side or you want to improve it, that the ability to be able to see the desired outcome.
Yes. Yeah.
Actually helps me realize my desired outcome. And so, we've talked about this in other things where some people say that, Feldenkrais is NLP of the body. And I've always called NLP Feldenkrais with words. But you're not just using words, you're also using imagery.
Oh, exactly. Right. Yeah. I don't have the answers for anybody. One of the presuppositions, and we probably should talk about those, and you mentioned, but one of the presuppositions is that the client has, typically everyone has all the internal resources they need to solve their problems. And I might be able to tell you how I would solve it if I were in your shoes, but I'm not in your shoes, and I'm not you. You mentioned earlier about maps, and that, of course, is the first presupposition of neurolinguistics programming, is that the map is not the territory. I have an internal map of reality, but it's not the only map of reality. You have a map of reality, and it's Fortunately, your map is close enough to mine that we can communicate, but I can't have your experience.
Mm-hmm.
I can try to decipher what, when you tell me about, say, a vacation and how much fun you had, I can try to decipher how that would impact me. But it's not your fun; it would be my fun,
Mm-hmm.
and it wouldn't be come from the same sources. So now I know that that's a little contradictory to the whole name of this subtitle of this whole program, but in some ways that is. We also believe that every behavior has some positive intention. That people don't do things for bad reasons, and people always make the best choices they know how to make at the time.
Mm-hmm.
That once I began to learn those presuppositions, it was a great learning. I finally figured out after I don't know how many years that my kids didn't do stuff just to hack me off. Their behavior made sense to them at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had a different map than I did.
Mm-hmm.
So when they did what I said, stupid stuff, is because I had the wrong map. Or I had a map that was different from theirs. It's not the wrong map. So
that does bring up, besides this question of the relationship between NLP saying the map is not the territory and our theme saying the map is the territory, this idea of a wrong map or an erroneous map. I mean, we're all on a journey. And go ahead.
So we don't talk about right or wrong. We're talking about useful.
Mm-hmm.
Is this useful? I've been a couple of times on trail hikes up in the Colorado Rockies. It's just a wonderful thing to do. But my little road map that I brought with me was not very useful when you're on Mount Harvard. Fortunately, there was somebody there who had a topographical map and we could figure out where we were. So one is useful in one context, but not so useful in the other. And so sometimes, one of the things that we do is I help the client find a more useful map for their circumstance. People only have two problems. There's only two. One is they have a history, and the other one is they got circumstances. So if you got a history or you got circumstances, you need the right map, So and that makes sense to me in NLP because I don't really need to know the content of the map of their situation. I don't need to know that. I need to know how is that stored and how can we change that so you have a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
In the stuff we're going to put online with this is I lead people through an exercise where they begin to be able to experience something similar to what we just did with your listening to the internal or the worrying, what to do with that voice and turning it down.
So what Larry's talking about is that if you decide to purchase the All Access Pass because you realize that you cannot watch all of these interviews in the course of 10 days, that there are bonus materials that come from all the different speakers that you will have available to you, in addition to transcripts of many of them and all of the awareness through movement lessons. But before we close out, Larry, I need to ask you about your map. I know that in your practice, you combine NLP as well as sound or sleep and your counseling work. Where do you see your map, your new territory?
Well, it's a lot bigger than it used to be.
Uh-huh.
And in addition to that, I know that when I get anxious or when I get frustrated or when I get that, maybe I should be looking at a different map. Maybe I should. So this afternoon, I was I was beginning to feel a bit anxious about this interview. And I mean, I've been public speaking since 1968 when I started teaching school. But for some reason I was with that, and there was this voice that just said, go in there and have some fun. Oh, that's a different map. I like that one. So that's what I've done, is come in and have some fun. And to be able to explain some of the things that I've experienced, some of the things I've seen. We used this, years ago, I facilitated a cancer support group. And people used their imagination to boost their immune system. They used their imagination to improve treatment therapies. For example, they imagined the radiation treatments burning only the cancer and not their skin. And they imagined the chemotherapy attacking only the cancer and not the rest of them. And the result of that was people, it didn't necessarily not have any burns from the radiation treatment, but it was much less than what the doctor expected. They didn't totally eliminate the nausea from the chemotherapy, but many of them didn't have to take medication for it. But the really important thing was that they began to imagine their own immune system, their white blood cells, and we allowed them, encouraged them, led them so that they could find whatever kind of metaphor worked for them. Some people saw the white blood cells as white knights and the cancer cells as some other color knight, and the white knights would beat the other colored knights. Some people didn't like the war imagery. So we had one client whose imagery was that the cancer was grass and the white cells were sheep. And the sheep were eating up the cancer, the white blood, the cancer cells, the grass. So it's not that I invite people to imagine a specific thing. Sometimes I let their own subconscious bring up the imagery that works best for them. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's really kind of simple. You can put a problem that you're having, put it in a box, tie a string to it, and have a helium balloon floated off into the distance. I had one lady who decided that she just wanted to put it in a box and throw it over her shoulder. And then she started laughing. And I said, what happened? She says, oh, I didn't realize it was on a cliff. I threw it over my shoulder and it went down and it goes and blew up. And the thing about that sounds silly, but they didn't have the concern that they had when they walked in the door.
It's so interesting.
I changed. Pardon?
No, I was just thinking about many stories I've read of people, trying to get rid of excess baggage or something that a burden they were carrying, and they thought it was gone, and then it came right back. Have you ever had that situation where people, actually thought that they had thrown it over their shoulder, it was all gone, and then there it was again, right in their face? How do you deal with that?
Well, obviously putting it over the shoulder wasn't the thing that worked for them. So
okay, good answer.
One of the presuppositions of NLP is that there are no failures, there's only feedback. Oh, that didn't work. Let's try something else.
Oh, that sounds like Feldenkrais too.
Yeah, it does. It is. It's exactly. So look, let's try this. And now I know what happens when I do that. It's not what I want, so I'm going to do something different. Even when I was working in substance abuse treatment, even the alcoholics knew that insanity was doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And it just doesn't work that way. So if that doesn't work, so I don't have a process for a specific problem. I come in, have a conversation. Sounds like this might work. Let's try it. Let's see how effective it is. And I almost never give people homework other than I want you to notice what's different. Mm-hmm. Because if we've done good work, they don't have to try to change. It will be automatic.
That's so amazing. Isn't it amazing with
It
both
is.
sounder sleep and with this, that by accessing these somatic processes, we can change something that all of the thinking in the world is not going to change. I mean,
Oh,
obviously,
right.
you're putting thought to this, you're applying your thought to this, but in a completely different way.
Yeah, if I could figure it out, I would have figured it out already. And if learning about it, I tell my clients, I said, if you want to know what happened to make you be this way, if you want to know what the cause was, etc., then you need to see somebody else.
Right.
My job is to just give you a better way of living. When I went to California for the training at what was then called the Dynamic Learning Center, now it's called NLP University. Their motto is neurolinguistics programming, creating a world to which people want to belong. And that's what hooked me, right. Is because, I've been in the helping professions. I decided I was going to be a teacher when I was 13. I wanted to help people do math because it was so much fun. They didn't think so. So I wanted to help, but that's what it's all about. That's what Feldenkrais is about change, creating a world to which people want to belong. People get up off their mats, having gone through a movement lesson. They don't understand why they've changed. They just know they did. Or through a functional integration. It boggles their minds now, because it's the little things that make the difference sometimes.
Right. Well, and it's as both Bandler and Moshe said, it's the difference. It's noticing the difference that makes the difference.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's it. Absolutely.
So I do understand that you are able to teach people online if they're interested, both sounder sleep and NLP?
Right. I'm interested in knowing, first of all, I'm interested in knowing specifically about people who might be interested in doing some training in NLP. But if they want a session, we could arrange it through Zoom. All they need to do is email me, either for sounder sleep or for neurolinguistics programming. Email me, Larry Wells at futurelifenow.com.
And if you don't remember that, or you're just kind of lost in trying to figure it out, you can always go to feldenkraissummit.com.
That's right.
And then go to Larry's profile page, and it will have all that information on it. Because there's not that many people in this area of the United States that are actually doing NLP trainings. So it would be a wonderful opportunity for people.
It's really quite interesting. It's kind of known on the West Coast and some on the East Coast. When I did my training in California, both in the master's program and in the trainer's training certification program, each of those classes had about 60 people in them. And of those 60 people, 6 or fewer were from the United States. Mm-hmm. They were from Europe and Asia. We had people from China and almost all the European countries were represented. So few South Americans. So.
Right. So if you're interested in something like that, be sure to be in touch with Larry. So Larry, I want to thank you so much, and I'll come back to say goodbye one more time. I just want to let everyone know that this video will be ready in a couple of hours. If you feel like you want to play it back, or if you missed part of it, and it will be up for at least 48 hours for free. After that, if you want to hear Larry again, you have the opportunity, as I said before, to purchase that all access pass. And I'm hoping that you all tune in. Our next event is actually going to be the panel discussion for Somatics at Large, which is a live event, and it's an opportunity for you to interact with our experts who've been reviewing the discussions and who will have lots of things to say, and it'll be your opportunity to speak up as well. So, Larry, thank you so much. It was actually wonderful to get to know you. I've only known you as this, mystery person through the years. So
Right.
it's been kind of cool. And I was nervous too, by the way. So, we're even there. And so,
But let me just,
so,
one of Richard Bandler's, one of his favorite things is, I want to know just how much ecstasy you can stand, and, and life can be good. I mean, we all have our problems. On the one hand, on the other hand, sometimes getting a better map is the answer, whether it's physical or Feldenkrais with words.
okay. Well, thank you. And I hope to meet you in person someday. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and see you soon.